Welcome back to Exploring Boys Education, a regular podcast produced by IBSC for leaders and educators in boys' schools around the world. I'm Bruce Collins, IBSC Director of Member Engagement. In this first episode of 2025, we explore the impact of technology on boys' brains with Kathryn Berkett. Join us as we delve into the challenges and strategies for managing technology use in boys' education and discover how to strike a balance between the digital world and real-world interactions. This episode is the first in a series of interviews with experts that consider boys' engagement and relationship with technology. Before I speak with Kathryn, however, a warm 2025 welcome to IBSC Executive Director Tom Batty, who joins me for his regular slot, the IBSC Newsreel.
Thank you, Bruce, and a very happy IBSC New Year to all, whether shoveling snow to get to school or navigating hot sand to get to waves. With a busy new year ahead, we're kicking off as we mean to continue with a rich programme of online offerings and a regional conference. As always, all details can be found on the professional development page of the IBSC website, but here's a brief snapshot. North American members can still enrol on 2 upcoming Ideas Labs. On the 18th of January, we have the IBSC Ideas Lab for heads and assistant heads in boys' elementary schools in North America. And on the 19th of February, there is the IBSC Ideas Lab for Directors of Professional Development in boys' schools in North America. So, if you're listening in North America and haven't yet signed up, head to the website and take a look. February brings 2 virtual events. Join me on the 12th of February for IBSC Insights, a complimentary programme for IBSC members in which we will explore the place of boys' education in growing good people in today's world. And on the 24th of February, please join us live online for a panel conversation on hot topics in boys' schools. We have 2 online classes starting on the 3rd of February. Mastering Middle Leadership in Boys' Schools and Mastery Practice in Teaching Boys. Lastly, for now, a call to join IBSC members at St Albans College in Pretoria, South Africa for the Southern African IBSC Regional Conference, which will run from the 5th to the 7th of March. It's a marquee IBSC event, and for those who totter, I say go, and you'll be happy come the journey home. For now, though, let's turn our attention to this podcast episode. Whenever there has been significant shift in the ways in which we share information, societies have shuddered amidst the restructuring of the individual's relationship with themselves and with those around them. With a Master's in Education Psychology and certification in the neurosequential model of therapeutics, our guest for this episode, Kathryn Berkett, turns brain science into practical application. She speaks to Bruce about how emerging technology might be impacting and hijacking boys' brains and what we, as educators of boys, can do to help boys find balance in the way they engage with and use technology. Thank you for joining the IBSC audience to share your insights, Kathryn. We are privileged to have you address us. Now, back to you, Bruce, to get it rolling.
Great to be talking to Kathryn Berkett on this episode. Kathryn is all the way from New Zealand, but I know works globally and travels quite a bit. Kathryn was also at our annual conference at Harrow and did a presentation there. Kathryn is from Engage Training, and I'm sure, Kathryn, you'll tell us a little bit more about that in a bit, but it's wonderful to have you on the pod to talk about this really, really important topic of tech and boys' brains, and obviously fascinating for everyone. I know you and I spoke before, and both of us are parents and have to manage this in our own lives as well. So, maybe we can start there about your thoughts about tech and the developing brain and what you see and how challenging it is just in your own personal life to kind of manage that. And then we can dive into some of the really focused things on boys and what the impact is on boys.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I am a parent. My kids, they're not kids anymore. They're 18 and 21. My kids spend more time on the computers than I'd like. Definitely struggle with that while they were teenagers. I did find the information I had more useful because I could put some science behind it and I could tell them why I was getting them off the devices, but I still couldn't do it completely. I still don't stay off devices completely. I spend more time on devices than I like. So the information is really useful, but it's just the same as, alcohol, which in my TEDx talk I sort of liken it to. And we know that too much alcohol is bad. But if we balance it, if we get it right, and if we actually be sensible with it and we understand what it's doing for us, then it's much better for us. So that's how I sort of see this information helping me in my personal life. But it's definitely difficult.
Well, what I like about that is you're not just talking theory, Kathryn. You have obviously the theory behind some of the stuff we're going to talk about now, but you have real experience of what that means, on the ground with kids. And I think especially for teachers and schools who are trying to navigate this space, I think it's really important to know that someone like you has not only first-hand experience, but the insight behind the experience too. Kathryn, before we dive into some of the questions, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about yourself, your background, and why, amongst other things, you're really interested in this intersection of neuroscience and technology and the impact that tech might have on developing brains.
I grew up on a dairy farm. I don't know if that's really important to where I ended up. My parents are still farmers, just not dairy farmers anymore. It's a hard life. And you learn that you have to work hard to get somewhere, and loved all of that stuff. Then when I left school, I started working in a unit at a school, and someone suggested I go and work in alternative education. I don't even know why she said it. She must have seen something in me. And alternative education here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is where young people go when they're not really doing well at school. So it's an alternative education. And so I went there, and there was this young man that I worked with, and I set him a maths task, and he said, "Can you leave me alone?" And because I gave him the theory of it, I came back and he'd worked out how to work it out. It was amazing. And I just couldn't believe that this young man who was failing in the traditional education system was actually more clever than most of the kids I'd come across in the education system. It's definitely more clever than me. And yet he was on this trajectory to definitely not being this hugely successful person in his own right. And so I studied educational psychology, which I loved, and it helped me understand the school system better. But then I worked with a place called Brainwave Trust, which did presentations. And in that, I had to study Dr. Bruce Perry. And Dr. Bruce Perry is the neurosequential model of therapeutics, understanding how the brain develops sequentially and how trauma impacts the brain. So I studied and qualified with him, and then started my own business, and I trained in that. And along the way, with devices coming in, you start to learn how devices are physically impacting the development of the brain. So when you understand trauma, when you understand oversensitization of the stress response, this all pans in. And so it's definitely a big part of what I do. The biggest part is working with those who have experienced trauma, but it's hugely important. And so it all came together, and it's something we need to know because it's a new epidemic, and knowing what we know is way better so we can deal with it. And that's how I see this info. Yeah,
I suppose knowledge, as you say, knowledge is power, and knowing what is important and how to approach even the conversations with kids in our schools is important. I loved watching your TED talk, Kathryn, I must say, and I'm going to suggest that folk go and watch that as well. I'll link it in the show notes. But this concept that you speak about around a device zombie apocalypse, I wonder if you could elaborate a little on that, and possibly what you see as the potential long-term consequences of excessive technology use for boys, especially in terms of their social, emotional, and cognitive development.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when you're on a TEDx talk, you want to be quite, get people thinking. So the apocalypse idea sort of came to me. What we know, and we 100% know, and we can see through research and MRI scans and watching the brain develop, is what the brain experiences is what the brain learns. And what goes in So states create traits, neurons that wire together, that fire together, wire together. It's all those things we learn. So what we've got to think about is, what are we putting into their brains with devices? And for me, I met devices very late in my life. Obviously, they weren't around when I was young. But what we're looking at now is what's happening, especially at young ages, is what is happening when they're on the devices. And what's going in is some pretty bad stuff when you start thinking about it. It was really shocking. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we just had a study done by a lady in Christchurch, and she tried to pretend she was a 13-year-old girl, and she went on and posted a profile. And within 22 minutes, she had pretty disturbing stuff being sent to her, 13-year-old. Stuff that she didn't ask for, stuff that she wasn't engaged in. And we've got to think, what are our boys being exposed to? And it's very hard as a parent, very hard as a teacher, very hard as anybody to limit what they see. So it's going in. And when it goes in, when I was a kid, my parents would go, should we watch the news? Should we not watch the news? And if they did show me the news, they were sitting there and they could go, oh, that was a bit scary, but let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. Our kids are digesting this stuff with no ability for us to monitor it, my son loves, looking into sort of conspiracy theories, but different things about how the pyramids were built. And he'll start arcing on about this stuff. And I'm thinking, this would be good to have a conversation with, but he's gone a long way down the track into all this info. And even though it's harmless stuff, there's some stuff that's not harmless that they're getting into. So what I worry about is, even from a very young age, what they're being exposed to, what's being repeated, those algorithms bringing that information in. But conversely, not having the conversations with us, the exposure to normal things, the exposure to the stuff that balances it. So that's what I have a real issue with, is if they were doing it for 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, not a problem, but they are on there for hours and hours. So it does worry me about the physical changes it's making to our brain, which then actually impacts their behaviors, thoughts, emotions.
It's like one story. You're not getting the whole picture. And that really resonates with me as well. How much opportunity do we have to speak with boys about what they're seeing? I picked up from what you said earlier, and also in your TED talk, that really this is, this behavior is related to addiction. And I wonder if you can explain to us some of the neuroscience behind that technology addiction in boys. What is it that drives that hunger just for more and to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, and also, I know we're talking about boys and we're saying boys as this, group, but we also know within boys there's just huge differences. So when I'm talking generalizing. But what happens in the brain when we hit puberty, the brain changes, huge changes, and there's so much to go into. We'll just stick with the things that apply to technology. But one of the things that changes in the brain, especially in the first few years after puberty, is that they have an increased sensitivity of dopamine. And dopamine is what we get when we go, ping, we've got a new, novel, exciting thing. Now, the generalized belief around that is because novelty makes you seek out new things, and we want our adolescents to start becoming separated from us, build new lives, get ready for the children that they can reproduce and all that sort of stuff. And in boys, it's often an increased sensitivity, to the top of the range. And that's because we actually want our boys to go out and take physical risks. And that's would lead them historically to leave the village, go out where it's dangerous, where there is no food, and find another village and reproduce with someone of a different gene pool. And that's healthy. That's what we want. We didn't want them to stay home and be safe and listen to our instructions. So the brain does all these changes to do that. So the dopamine, and it's heaps more than just dopamine, but dopamine's the primary neurotransmitter we're talking about. So that gets more sensitive. So every buzz they get, they've got a significantly increased desire to chase that buzz again. And being really simplistic, what happens when the dopamine buzz is pinging off, the part of our brain up the top that's about our brake system, should I or shouldn't I, that hasn't got any energy going to it. So when we scan an adolescent's brain, they are pushing for that reward. They're seeking that buzz, and they don't have the capacity to activate the part of the brain that says, should I or shouldn't I? And the other really big neuroscience thing about hitting that stage is, generalizingly, males in their tribes, they need to be hierarchical. It's significantly more hierarchical as a male than a female. And so what happens when you hit puberty is you have to work out where your strengths are to contribute to this tribe. Am I faster? And I'm the scout. I'm quiet. I'm fast. Am I strong? I'm going to be throwing the spears. Am I this? Am I the technical person? So you really want to work out if you're better or not as good as someone. It's not all about being the best. It's about where do I fit in our pecking order. So this becomes absolutely primary in their brain. And I don't know about the international system, but certainly in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we are starting to get towards nobody wins. We don't want anyone to compete against each other. We don't want to give first, second, and third prizes because the other people get disappointed. Now, I'm all for participation. I'm all for that for those who want to be in that space. But we have, especially our young boys at that age, this massive desire to prove themselves. And we're taking that away. And guess what they do? They have to find it somewhere else. And online, they can compete, find their status, be violent, be stronger, be able to kill people and do all this sort of stuff. And so that's this huge drive at any time of our life. But in those early adolescent stages, you can start to see why that all culminates in them becoming absolutely obsessed with getting that next buzz, that novelty, and the danger and the fighting and that sort of stuff. It's inherent in their brain to learn this stuff because if they don't learn it, they can't protect the tribe. So we go back to biology, but that's why we see this huge shift often quite quickly at that age.
It's amazing to hear kind of the theory behind that, because as a teacher of boys, particularly in that age group, I've noticed that exact shift, but I've never had the words to kind of say, well, kind of that's what it is. So it just feels to me like this is quite a minefield, to be honest, and that boys, when they're navigating that digital space, face so many challenges. What might some of those challenges be for boys, and what is the knock-on effect of those challenges in terms of their behavior and development?
As a minefield, and I absolutely feel for any young person going through this stage, and I feel for teachers trying to navigate it and parents trying to navigate it. I really do. We didn't want these things in here. There was no ethics board had a look at these things and said, you know what, would it be okay to introduce them or not? They've come in, and now we're spending millions of dollars on increasing their addictive ability, increasing the algorithms, and it's the opposite of what our brains need. So totally get that. It's minefield's a good word. But what we want to do is a little bit of bad's fine, right? Like, and it's okay to have them playing some games sometimes. They want to, it's their desire. What I want us to do is make sure when we think about what they're doing online, do we think that is activating their brain in a way that is going to make them a good adult? And we don't have to be perfect, right? So there's lots of bad things we can do along the way that are not going to be so terrible. But are they doing things that are going to increase them to be a good man when they grow up? And those are the things that we want to do is empathy. Now, what I see as a real issue, and this can be really contentious, and it's been contentious before, so you might need to edit this off if you really need to. But we allow, especially our boys, but our girls as well, our boys, to be online and be violent. There's lots of violence online. And what they do is they get points for being more violent. When I was a kid, if there was a fight, someone went down, that was the end of the fight. Now it carries on because online you continue to increase the points if you continue to punch them or kick them to the head and all that sort of stuff. You actually increase your points. Now they are getting a reward for that. They are getting a status increase. It feels good. There is no immediate negative feedback. When I was a kid, I wasn't into fighting. I wasn't a fighter. And lots of people aren't. But some people are. They want to feel what it feels like to be in a conflict. Now, if we don't let our young men who are desiring this actually do something physical with each other, they don't learn immediate feedback from this. So their brain is learning that violence is only good. It only means you win, where that's not actually reality. And I'm not saying letting our kids beat each other up. I'm saying bring in maybe some controlled things like boxing or wrestling or something like that, where they can actually learn that there's immediate feedback. But now we're not allowed to play bull rush. We're not allowed to play tackle rugby. We're not allowed to do anything that might hurt anyone. So can you see that we're losing understanding in our brain that violence begets violence. We're actually learning that violence gets you positive things. And it really worries me with our young men, especially who are, their brains are tuned into doing this. So they're not doing anything bad. They're just doing what's naturally in their brain, but we've given them these online devices that have just created a really negative space for them to overactivate this biological desire. Does that make sense?
It doesn't, and so they're not getting that natural feedback, like you said, that they would get in those natural tussles or whatever they're involved in. What also strikes me is, I mean, in the world of online gaming, not only are you as a boy playing these games exposed to violence, you're probably exposed to violence with other people, and the feedback they're also getting is you get more points, and there's that sense of competition probably with boys as well. So it just it ups the ante, it heightens their engagement, because not only are they getting those points for themselves, but the boys that they're doing it with, whether they be in the same room or online somewhere, are also kind of involved in this process. It brings a whole new complexity to our understanding.
It does. And it also brings empathy to, those people trying to stop them, because they're literally getting addicted to this stuff. And it does give them huge pleasure. Dopamine that we get instantly, novelty, not expecting it, is way bigger than the stuff we get if we go out and play sports. We have a sports day at school. But what we get from a sports day at school, competing there and being with each other and congratulating each other, is like a slower burn. It's more oxytocin. It's more of that the less active neurotransmitter activations. So it is good and we get a pleasure from it, but it's nowhere near the rush that we'll get from this online stuff. So you're exactly right. The status increase in boys is part of the dopamine buzz as well, getting better, going there. So you can start to see why these things can be really difficult for our young boys to navigate.
Is there any kind of connection as well, or similar response to boys' engagement with social media and other things like that?
As we sort of see through research, it's more boys gaming and girls on social media, because girls are more attracted to the relationships. This is oxytocin. It's this buzz. This we fall oxytocin in love with each other. So we need to know what everybody's doing, because we form cliques to protect our babies. It's sort of, and again, that's not defined. It's just a generalized idea. But with our boys as well, they get on YouTube. So when we're talking about social media, we can also talk about those YouTube. And you were talking about it flicking through. And what they've got is fast things, but what they're often watching is little clips of people being put down. And you can see boys are really attracted to that. My son would watch it and they're horrible and they're bad and they're this, because it's about status again. Do you see it? But then they learn that putting people down is a fun thing to do. And so it's completely understandable why their behavior is impacted. And they're not bad people for being attracted to that. It's their biology attracting them to it. So it's this perfect storm, really.
I was struck by something you said early on in our conversation. You were talking about, the desire we have as teachers of boys to see boys become good people. And so obviously something like this is important for teachers of boys, for educators in boys' schools to really understand. And I wonder how boys' schools in particular can create opportunities to mitigate some of the potential negative effects of technology on boys. There must be some strategies that teachers can think through. Do you have some advice for educators of boys?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to give it, but knowing that even giving it doesn't make it work. But if we think about other addictions, now we've had alcohol and smoking around for a very long time. And if we think about that, we started early. We started educating our kids early that as much as these things might feel good, you might want to do them, there might be pressure to do it, there's these impacts on your brain and your body and your life and stuff like that. Now, that's really hard, by the way, for our young people to even imagine themselves as older people. It's not possible in the brain. So we have to rote learn it. We have to get it into their brain. Smoking will kill you, like that sort of stuff. That's it. And some kids will still do it, right? When we hit adolescence, that's when it sort of gets a little bit too dopamine-y. Not that we can't do it then, but we should be doing it before. we should be educating them on the impacts that these things are going to have on their brain. What's good screen time? What's bad screen time? Because there is a difference between the two. What is it doing to you? And I certainly would educate my kids all the time. Have you noticed sitting at the dinner table after, sometimes they'd be in places where they've been on the device a lot. Do you notice your foot's tapping and you can't sit still? And then, a couple of days later, hey, have you noticed how calm you are now? Can you see the difference in your body when you spend a lot of time on a device? Try and point things out, try and make it a real thing for them that these things are going to change their brain, body, their behavior. I noticed you talking like this. I think you've been watching something. If we can start educating them on the impact that can potentially have on them, that's going to potentially reduce the likelihood that they'll get into it so much to form an addiction. Do you see? And that's how we need to do. And we do need to monitor, and we do need to be a bit more strict on it, taking their phones off them, taking their devices off them at night. It's not fair. I can't even put my device down and disengage with it sometimes. I'm like, oops, I'm sure I promised myself I was going to just do 5 more minutes. Now, we cannot expect our young people who are fully addicted to these things to not be engaging. So we need to be the big people, and we need to do that despite the fact that they hate it and they're going to die if they don't have their phone. No, actually, this is important, and it's important enough for them to not like me for me to take it off them. So things like that can be what we need to move towards.
I suppose there's a real opportunity here for boys' schools to create environments that foster kind of real world skills or engagement to the real world, develop boys' emotional acuity, whatever it is. So, even as technology starts permeating life more, that boys have the skills to make good decisions.
Absolutely. And what goes into the brain is what the brain connects. So if we create spaces in the evenings where there is no device time, there's none whatsoever, guess what? They have to sit around and talk and have conversations, and they'll potentially argue and they'll disagree. And then they'll be friends with that person the next day, and they go, I can disagree with someone and be okay. But you see, online, we just cut them off. We just don't talk to them again. And because you can if you've got non-friend people online. So you're completely right. We could create beautiful environments for them to practice the things that we want them to be able to do, especially as an adult, but even as young people and adolescents. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember it was 2010 or 2011 here in South Africa where kind of educational technology became the big sort of buzzword, and tech was flooding into schools, and schools were trying to figure out how to use this. Is this the next innovative thing that'll cure all our struggles in the classroom or whatever it is? And I think, some schools dived headlong into that. Others were more wary, and there was this, but there was this real sense of, okay, we need to think about how we use tech in schools, how we engage with it. And I think almost in some ways the pendulum has swung the other way now, where people are banning technology from the classroom. But I wonder how you strike that balance, or what insight would you have, for schools who are trying to use tech in positive ways. And I think there are great ways tech can be used to enhance learning. But at the same time, understanding that we need to protect boys' developing brains because of some of the things that you've mentioned here. How do we strike that balance and make sure that boys get both the benefit of technology, but we're also protecting them from some of the harm?
Absolutely. And again, knowledge is key, right? So what we're looking for is the first element is the body, and the second element is the brain. So the body goes into a stress response when it feels danger. And when I say danger, it's perceived. It's just the brain perceiving it. So when we're on devices, do you believe the young person is activating their body into a stress response? So their heart rate's up a little bit, could be just a little bit, but their breathing's different. Their shoulders might be clenched. Their eyes might be a bit dilated. They're literally in a stress response. That's what we'd get if they were gaming or doing that sort of thing. Now, in that space, it's a physical activation. And if you want to run a marathon, you hold your body into a physical state for longer and longer periods of time. We're allowing our young boys to stay on these things, play these games, and literally train their body to stay in a state of stress for longer periods of time, which can look like, and there's lots of reasons for anxiety, overstimulation, unconcentration, not being able to sit still, all of these sorts of things. But one of the potential drivers of this is actually training our body to stay in a stress response, and we're doing that online. So do you believe at the time the young person was activating into a stress response and staying there, even if it was a low level? Now, the other thing is, what are they doing in their brain? So if we look at a school day, if you're using your devices to look up some information, they're doing it as a group, they're discussing it, they're taking turns on it. Do you know, I loved my kids would get the TikToks out and they would watch a TikTok, and then the next minute I'd be hearing something from the room, and they were practicing balancing on each other's shoulders and trying to do this and trying to copy it. Now, to me, that's fantastic use of a device. Sitting there on TikTok going through, but watching something and then physically having to recreate it was hilarious, and learnt so much. And I thought, what are they doing in their brain? They're doing amazing things, working together, So I want teachers to be able to look at that device and say, do I believe it's increasing the learning in their brain? They're connecting positive things. They are learning how to negotiate with that, or learning how to empathize with people from different countries. It's brilliant that we can have access to that. Also, how's their body state? And if we can balance that, then that's when we get the good device use compared to the negative device use.
I suppose there'll be some questions about it, and when we were talking about this interview, I raised this as well, is, some of the neurodiverse boys that we might have at school might be more reliant on their devices, or their way of regulating might be to find solace in a game that they play habitually, or something like that. And I mean, that brings another layer of complexity, I think, to the conversation, doesn't it?
It does, but again, using this information is really big. So because I train a lot and people say, oh, should I let my kid on the device or not? My question is, when you ask them to hop off, so when you ask them to disengage from that device, that's when you can usually get a good sense of whether they've used that device to calm themselves down, to activate them back into rest and digest. Their brain is back into a green brain space, i.e. when I train, I talk about the green brain, and they're allowing you to be empathic and have time management. So time to hop off. Okay, I'll hop off. They put the device down and disengage. Now, it is more likely that someone on the neurodiverse spectrum may use a device to actually need to time out, to calm down. And when you ask them to hop off, they're like, yeah, good, I'll hop off, and now I'll re-engage with you. If, however, the device is activating their stress response, when you say time to hop off, they're like, it's not time, I have to, and even then, by the way, I'm okay with having a bit of that time on the device when you're activating stress response and you're activating that. We all do stuff that's not quite right, but I don't want you to see it as good time. Even though they may have been quiet while they're on that device, they're not activating good things in their brain. After that, I want to do something that helps them calm down. So yeah, looking at that often, and it's not all, again, people within neurodiversity are more different than those beyond. We're all different. If you feel that it is activating them into a positive state and their brain's engaging, then I'm all good with it. Still not for massive hours, because even our neurodiverse young people who struggle with communication need to practice communication, need to practice socializing in a tolerable way. So it still doesn't want to be the only way of communicating, but I definitely can use that to offset. And that's why some technology is amazing with this invention. I love a lot of things it's bringing to us, but we've got to balance the good and the bad.
Absolutely. What I've loved about this conversation with you is it has largely been positive, in the sense that I think so often when we're looking at a problem like boys and technology, and whether it's hijacking their brains, we can so often become so wrapped up in the problem that we don't see the solutions. And I think what this conversation has done for me in particular, and I hope has done for folk who are listening, is that, there are ways to think about this in a positive way. There are things we can notice. There are things that we can do. I wonder, from your perspective, what do you see as the most promising solutions for addressing this issue of technology addiction in boys, and how might those be implemented effectively in a school setting?
I think we need to remember how much fun it is to be in contact with human beings, with other humans. And we're losing that. Creating spaces for our young boys to have fun and to be independent, not controlling them so much. Give them those moments of free play and controlling themselves, and having a little bit of not rough and tumble, but, allowing that stuff. And often devices take them away from that. And, people say, oh, there's no fights. There's no fights when we have devices. Yeah, but we're taking away interaction. And interaction usually means arguments. And I'm not even saying physical fights. I'm saying arguments or discussions. And then we get to a different plane of thought. And having those beautiful times that are not as buzzy, but end up being increasingly satisfying are what we need to create. And if we can create them, they go, actually, you know what? I want to put down my device and I want to go and talk to a bunch of people. That's what I do as an adult. I think, you know what? I want to get out and see my mates today. I'm going to feel so much better afterwards. We have the capacity, especially in boys' schools, where boys are coming together and having that camaraderie to really engage those spaces and to feed back to them and get them to start to realize how rewarding that was, rather than chasing that quick dopamine rush. We have a huge capacity to do that.
I love that you've brought it back to relationship. I think that's something in boys' school circles that we talk about a lot. Just that whole thing around boys, particularly being relational learners, where they learn teachers before subjects. And I think the opportunity that they have to also connect with other boys, and that's so important. And schools are amazing spaces to do that. So I'm so glad you brought it back to that point. I wonder, as we sort of wrap up this conversation, I mean, we're already ending on a hopeful note, but what key message do you want educators to take away from the conversation that we've had, particularly around technology's impact on boys, or what their role can be for giving these boys a better future that's more balanced?
I mean, our young people are beautiful, aren't they? And what I adore about our young people, and especially the new age young people, is they're not taught to be compliant. Like I was a compliant child because I was supposed to go to school, sit down, listen, and regurgitate what I was told. I'm not saying I was perfect by any way, but compliance, right? And we don't do compliance anymore. Our kids are not compliant. But what I adore about it is it creates an individual for them, and they are challenging and they are out there. And we have the capacity to let them do that. And technology allows them to do that. It allows them to find out new things and hear new information and not be just constricted to what us as a teacher might tell them. They can learn this stuff. And I want teachers to use that, to embrace that. What we've got to see is that if it's actually changing their brain-body structures, we've got to get away from that. So the positive thing is that we have this beautiful ability to use it, but balance is the key. So, and knowledge helps us have that balance. So, yeah.
So, Kathryn, there's hope for the future when it comes to boys and their relationship with technology.
100%. I adore, my young man is 18. He's just started a job. It's a really difficult job. And he's pushing through and he's having to meet people. He's a personal trainer, so he has to interview, he has to talk to adults. And I see how good he is because I have forced him into spaces that he didn't want to be in when he was younger, tolerably. Now, it's always tolerably, it's not intolerable, but I love seeing the young man that he's becoming and blossom and all of that. So I just think we absolutely have huge, beautiful young people growing in this world. And if we can enhance them as much as possible, then let's do it.
I feel like we could branch out into so many different things from this conversation. But I wanted to give you an opportunity too. You train a lot, and there might very well be folk who would like to hear more about what you do. How can people get hold of you and get insights into what you offer?
Yeah, thanks. So I have engagetraining.co.nz. That is my website. And on there, I have got some mini lessons, some really quick little things that you can look at, all free. You can do them with your staff. I've got some questions and some exercises. I am available for training. Yeah, I love what I do and whatever I can offer out. It's there on my website, or contact me and ask.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. I think it's clear that you love what you do. It has come through as you've shared. And just incredibly grateful for your insights and your wisdom and all that you have shared with us for this episode. I'm sure it's going to get people thinking, and also I believe people are going to be encouraged that there is a way to rehumanize education and to bring relationship back in and to find a good balance between this online world that is with us, but also that we can't forget about the folk who are next to us. And I think you've encouraged us to do that. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bruce. It's been fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in and joining us for this thought-provoking conversation about technology's impact on boys' brains. We hope Kathryn's insights into the challenges and strategies for managing technology use in boys' education will be helpful. Her emphasis on creating a balance between technology and real-world interactions provides a roadmap for educators seeking to navigate these complex issues. Let's continue to support the development of young men who can use technology responsibly and thrive in the digital age. Look out for more episodes on boys and tech later in 2025. But until our next episode, keep on championing boys' education.